A quiet Atlanta neighborhood, a beautiful housewife, a young man next door. Their secret affair was like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. But no one could have predicted the devastating aftermath when passion turned to violence, leaving one person dead and countless lives shattered forever. The year was 2009, and life in this peaceful Atlanta suburb seemed picture perfect. Manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by the occasional oak tree or children's playground. Neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles and friendly waves, their voices carrying across perfectly trimmed hedges. Block parties were a regular occurrence, and everyone knew everyone else's business, or so they thought. At the center of it all was the Parker residence, a beautiful two-story home that seemed to embody the American dream. Vanessa Parker, known to her friends as Nessa, was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. At 38, she still possessed the vitality and beauty of someone much younger. Her golden brown hair always looked as if she'd just stepped out of a salon, and her green eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. Nessa was the envy of many women in the neighborhood, not just for her looks, but for her seemingly perfect life. Her husband, Derek, was a successful businessman whose job often took him away from home for days at a time. Tall, distinguished, and always impeccably dressed, Derek was the picture of success. He drove a luxury car, wore designer suits, and had the kind of confident smile that opened doors and closed deals. From the outside, the Parkers appeared to have it all: money, status, and a seemingly perfect marriage. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, Nessa felt a gnawing emptiness that no amount of material wealth could fill. The spacious rooms of their beautiful home often felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. Derek was rarely home, and when he was, the spark that had once ignited their relationship seemed to have fizzled out. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams for the future, had become perfunctory exchanges about bills and social obligations. Nessa found herself craving something more, something exciting to break the monotony of her days. She threw herself into neighborhood activities, joining book clubs and organizing charity events. But even as she smiled and laughed with her friends, a part of her yearned for something or someone to make her feel alive again. Enter Kol Wilson, the 22-year-old son of their next-door neighbor. Kol had grown up before Nessa's eyes, transforming from a lanky teenager into a handsome young man with a bright future ahead of him. He was everything Derek wasn't: young, energetic, and always around. Fresh out of college and working on starting his own tech company, Kol had moved back in with his mother to save money. Kol was tall and athletic, with warm brown eyes and a smile that could light up a room. He had an easygoing charm that made him popular with everyone in the neighborhood. The older residents saw him as a success story, a local boy made good. The younger ones admired his ambition and drive. And Nessa? Nessa found herself increasingly drawn to his youthful energy and enthusiasm for life. It started innocently enough. A lingering glance across the fence as Kol mowed his mother's lawn, his t-shirt clinging to his muscular frame. A casual conversation that lasted just a little too long when they bumped into each other at the local grocery store. Nessa found herself looking forward to these chance encounters, her heart racing every time she saw Kol. But on December 15th, 2009, everything changed. Derek was away on another business trip, and Nessa was home alone. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence broken only by the steady drip of a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Frustrated and unable to fix it herself, Nessa impulsively called Kol for help. Kol arrived quickly, toolbox in hand, and a ready smile on his face. As he worked on the faucet, Nessa found herself mesmerized by his strong hands and the look of concentration on his face. Their casual chit-chat turned more personal, and before they knew it, they were sharing their hopes, dreams, and disappointments. In that moment of vulnerability, something shifted between them. Their eyes met, and the air seemed to crackle with electricity. Before either of them could think better of it, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, and all thoughts of right and wrong flew out the window. The affair was intoxicating. For Nessa, it was a chance to feel young and desired again. She felt like the woman she used to be, vibrant, passionate, alive. For Kol, it was an opportunity to be with a mature, beautiful woman who made him feel like a man. He was in awe of Nessa's sophistication and life experience, feeling both empowered and humbled by her attention. They met in secret whenever they could, using the privacy of Nessa's home as their sanctuary. Every business trip that took Derek away became an opportunity for stolen moments of passion. They were like teenagers, sneaking around and reveling in the thrill of their forbidden romance. As winter turned to spring, their encounters became more frequent and more reckless. They convinced themselves that they were being careful, that no one would ever find out. But in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, secrets had a way of coming to light. Mrs. Simmons, the elderly neighbor across the street, was known for her sharp eyes and loose lips. At 75, she spent most of her days perched by her front window, keeping a watchful eye on the comings and goings of the neighborhood. She had noticed Kentrell's frequent visits to the Parker house, always when Derek was away. At first, she dismissed it as nothing more than neighborly help. But as the visits became more frequent and lasted longer, she began to suspect something more sinister was afoot. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood grapevine. At book club meetings, over fences, and during carpool lines, whispers and sidelong glances followed Nessa and Kentrell wherever they went. Some neighbors were scandalized, others titillated by the gossip. A few even felt a twinge of envy, secretly wishing they had the courage to pursue their own forbidden desires. But lost in their passion, Nessa and Kentrell remained oblivious to the growing scandal around them. They were living in their own little bubble, blind to the raised eyebrows and hushed conversations that followed in their wake. In their minds, they were being discreet. In reality, they were the talk of the town. Letitia Wilson, Kentrell's mother, was the last to know. A deeply religious woman with high hopes for her son, she refused to believe the rumors at first. Letitia had raised Kentrell on her own after his father passed away when Kentrell was just a boy. She had sacrificed everything to give him a good life and a bright future. The idea that he could be involved in something so scandalous was incomprehensible to her. But as the evidence mounted, the hushed phone calls, the sudden errands that took Kentrell next door, the knowing looks from her fellow church members, Letitia could no longer deny the truth. Her son, her pride and joy, was involved in an affair with a married woman nearly twice his age. The confrontation between Letitia and Kentrell was explosive. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, just after church. Letitia, still in her Sunday best, cornered Kentrell in the kitchen. Her voice, usually so calm and controlled, shook with anger and disappointment as she demanded answers. "Is it true?" she asked, her eyes searching Kentrell's face. "Are you involved with that woman next door?" Kentrell, caught off guard, tried to deny it at first, but under his mother's unwavering gaze, his resolve crumbled. In a moment of weakness, he confessed everything. How it started, how he felt about Nessa, how he couldn't seem to stop himself even though he knew it was wrong. Letitia listened in stunned silence, her heart breaking with every word. When Kentrell finished, she took a deep breath and delivered an ultimatum. "You end this now," she said, her voice cold and firm, "or I'll tell Derek everything myself." Torn between his love for Nessa and his respect for his mother, Kentrell found himself at a crossroads. He promised his mother he would end things, but in his heart, he wasn't sure if he could follow through. Meanwhile, Nessa was beginning to feel the weight of her actions. The thrill of the affair was wearing off, replaced by guilt and fear. She found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, convinced that Derek would walk in and catch her at any moment. She noticed the way her neighbors looked at her, some with judgment, others with pity. She had always been respected, admired even. Now she felt like a pariah in her own neighborhood. What had started as an exciting diversion had become a source of constant stress. Nessa thought about Derek, his trust, his love, the life they had built together. Was she really willing to throw it all away for a fling with a man nearly half her age? And what about Kentrell? He had his whole life ahead of him. Was it fair to entangle him in this mess? On March 5th, 2010, after a sleepless night filled with soul-searching, Nessa made the difficult decision to end things with Kentrell. She knew it would be painful, but she convinced herself it was the right thing to do. She invited him over, steeling herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation, but she had no idea just how difficult it would turn out to be. Kentrell arrived at the Parker house around 7 p.m., expecting another passionate encounter. Instead, he found Nessa sitting on the couch, her face a mask of sorrow and determination. The atmosphere was tense, a far cry from the passionate rendezvous they usually shared. "We need to talk," Nessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kentrell's heart sank. He had a feeling he knew what was coming, but he wasn't prepared for the finality of Nessa's words. Whatever this is between us, it has to end," Nessa continued, her eyes not quite meeting Kentrell's. "We can't see each other anymore. It's not right, and it's not fair to anyone involved." At first, Kentrell pleaded with her to reconsider. He got down on his knees in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Please, Nessa," he begged, his voice cracking with emotion. "I love you. We can make this work somehow. I'll tell my mom you'll leave Derek. We can be together for real." But as Nessa remained firm in her decision, shaking her head sadly at his pleas, Kentrell's desperation turned to anger. How could she just throw away what they had? Didn't she love him? Had it all meant nothing to her? The argument escalated quickly. Voices were raised, accusations flew. Kentrell paced the room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Nessa stood her ground, but her resolve was wavering in the face of Kentrell's raw emotion. "You're just like all the others," Kentrell spat, his handsome face contorted with anger and pain. "Using me and then throwing me away when it gets too complicated. That's not fair," Nessa shot back, her own temper flaring. "You knew what this was from the beginning. We both did." In a moment of rage, Kentrell grabbed Nessa's arm, trying to make her listen. "You can't do this to me," he growled, his grip tightening. "You can't just end it like this." Nessa's eyes widened in fear. She had never seen this side of Kentrell before. She pulled away, telling him to leave. "This is exactly why we need to end this," she said, her voice shaking. "Look at what it's doing to us." But Kentrell wasn't listening anymore. He reached for her again, and in the struggle that followed, Nessa lost her balance. Time seemed to slow down as she teetered at the top of the stairs, her arms windmilling as she tried to regain her footing. Kentrell's face changed from anger to horror as he realized what was happening. He reached out to grab her, but it was too late. Nessa fell backward down the stairs, her body tumbling over itself in a sickening display. The thud of her body hitting the floor echoed through the empty house, followed by an eerie silence. Kentrell stood at the top of the stairs, frozen in horror. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, snapping out of his shock, he rushed down the stairs, calling Nessa's name. But it was too late. Her neck was bent at an unnatural angle, her once vibrant green eyes now staring blankly at nothing. Panic set in as the reality of the situation crashed over Kentrell. He knew he should call for help, but fear clouded his judgment. What would people think? Would anyone believe it was an accident? His whole future flashed before his eyes, his dreams, his ambitions, all crumbling away in the face of this tragedy. In a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, Kentrell fled the scene. He ran out of the house, leaving Nessa's lifeless body at the foot of the stairs. The cool night air hit his face as he stumbled down the street, his mind reeling from what had just happened. The next morning, Derek returned home early from his business trip, hoping to surprise Nessa. He had been feeling guilty about all the time he'd been spending away from home, and he was determined to make it up to her. He entered the house with a bouquet of her favorite flowers, calling out her name. But instead of Nessa's warm welcome, he was met with an eerie silence. Confused, he made his way through the house, the flowers dropping from his hand as he caught sight of something at the bottom of the stairs. In that moment, Derek's world shattered. His wife, the woman he had loved for nearly 2 decades, lay dead at the bottom of their staircase. Derek's anguished cries alerted the neighbors, and soon the quiet street was alive with the sound of sirens. The police arrived within minutes of Derek's frantic 911 call, their vehicles bathing the neighborhood in flashing red and blue lights. At first glance, it appeared to be a tragic accident, but as Detective Michael Ramirez began to investigate, he sensed that something wasn't quite right. A 20-year veteran of the force, Ramirez had seen his fair share of accidents and crimes. Something about this scene made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The angle of the fall, the bruising on Nessa's arms, it all pointed to something more sinister than a simple misstep. As he surveyed the scene, Ramirez's keen eyes picked up on subtle details that others might have missed. A knocked-over vase, scratch marks on the wall, signs of a struggle that shouldn't have been present in a simple fall. As the investigation unfolded, the secrets that had been simmering beneath the surface of this quiet neighborhood began to boil over. Mrs. Simmons was the first to come forward, eager to share her suspicions about Nessa and Kentrell's relationship. She recounted in vivid detail the comings and goings she had observed over the past few months, painting a picture of a clandestine affair that had been hiding in plain sight. Other neighbors, emboldened by the police presence and the shock of Nessa's death, came forward with their own observations. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, revealing a story of passion, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. Derek was devastated. Not only had he lost his wife, but now he was learning that she had been unfaithful. The life he thought he knew was crumbling around him. He spent hours being questioned by the police, his mind reeling as he tried to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the secrets that were now coming to light. "I don't understand," he kept saying, his voice hollow with shock and grief. "We were happy. At least, I thought we were happy." Kentrell, meanwhile, was falling apart. Consumed by guilt and fear, he could barely eat or sleep. He jumped at every sound, convinced that at any moment the police would come knocking on his door. His mother, sensing that something was terribly wrong, tried to get him to open up, but Kentrell remained silent, terrified of the consequences of his actions. It was the discovery of text messages on Nessa's phone that finally broke the case wide open. Detective Ramirez, following a hunch, had obtained a warrant to search Nessa's phone records. What he found was a goldmine of information. Hundreds of messages exchanged between Nessa and Kentrell over the past few months. The messages revealed not only the extent extent of their relationship, but also hinted at the argument that had taken place on the night of her death. The final messages were particularly damning. Nessa, we need to talk. This can't go on. Kentrell, what do you mean? I thought we had something special. Nessa, it's over, Kentrell. Please understand. Kentrell, we need to discuss this in person. I'm coming over. That last message was timestamped just an hour before the estimated time of Nessa's death. On March 20th, 2010, just 2 weeks after Nessa's death, Kol Wilson was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The news sent shockwaves through the community. How could this have happened? How could they not have seen it coming? The day of the arrest was one the neighborhood would never forget. Police cars swarmed the Wilson residence, their sirens silent but lights flashing, casting an eerie blue glow over the usually peaceful street. Neighbors gathered on their front lawns, watching in stunned silence as Kentrell was led out in handcuffs, his head bowed in shame. Letitia Wilson's anguished cries could be heard throughout the block as she watched her son being taken away. "He's a good boy," she screamed, her voice raw with emotion. "There must be some mistake." But there was no mistake. The evidence was damning, and Kentrell, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, had confessed to his role in Nessa's death during questioning. The trial that followed was a media sensation. It had all the elements of a made-for-TV movie: a beautiful housewife, a young lover, a tragic death. The Atlanta courthouse was packed every day as friends, neighbors, and curious onlookers came to watch the drama unfold. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes reaching towards the sky like metal trees, broadcasting every detail of the case to a captivated audience. Prosecutor Alicia Morales, a stern woman with sharp features and an even sharper mind, painted a damning picture of Kentrell as a young man who couldn't handle rejection. Her opening statement was a masterclass in storytelling, weaving together the facts of the case into a narrative that left little doubt about Kentrell's guilt. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice resonating through the hushed courtroom, "this is a case about a young man who thought he could play adult games without facing adult consequences. When Vanessa Parker tried to end their illicit affair, Kol Wilson's anger got the best of him, leading to a confrontation that ended in tragedy. Kentrell's defense attorney, Samuel Chen, a seasoned lawyer known for his ability to connect with juries, had his work cut out for him. He tried to portray the death as a tragic accident. He argued that while Kentrell had made mistakes, he never intended to hurt Nessa. The fall, Chen claimed, was the result of a heated argument that spiraled out of control. "My client is not a murderer," Chen implored the jury during his opening statement. "He's a young man who got caught up in a situation beyond his control. What happened to Vanessa Parker was a terrible accident, one that Kentrell will regret for the rest of his life." The testimony was heart-wrenching. Derek took the stand first, describing his shock and grief at losing Nessa and learning of her infidelity. As he spoke about their life together, his voice cracked with emotion. "She was my everything," he said, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I thought we had a perfect life. I never imagined, never dreamed." Mrs. Simmons was next, recounting her observations with a mix of sorrow and self-importance. Her words lent credence to the prosecution's case, painting a vivid picture of the affair that had been unfolding right under everyone's noses. "I saw that boy sneaking over there at all hours," she testified, her voice quavering with age but firm with conviction. "I knew something wasn't right, but I never thought it would end like this." But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Kentrell himself took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as he walked to the witness box, all eyes fixed on the young man whose actions had torn apart two families and shaken an entire community. Visibly shaken, Kentrell admitted to the affair and the argument. He described in agonizing detail the moment Nessa fell, insisting that he had tried to catch her but was too late. "I loved her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen. If I could trade places with her, I would in a heartbeat." His remorse seemed genuine, but was it enough to sway the jury? As Kentrell stepped down from the witness stand, the question hung heavy in the air. The deliberations lasted for 3 days. Outside the courthouse, reporters speculated endlessly about what was happening behind those closed doors. Inside, 12 men and women grappled with the weight of their responsibility, poring over every piece of evidence, every word of testimony. Finally, on a warm spring morning, the jury returned their verdict. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as the foreman stood to deliver their decision. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant, Kol Wilson, guilty. The word hung in the air for a moment before chaos erupted. erupted. Kentrell slumped in his chair, his face a mask of despair. Letitia's wails of anguish cut through the commotion like a knife. Derek sat stone-faced, his expression unreadable as he watched the young man who had destroyed his life face the consequences of his actions. The judge called for order, his gavel echoing through the courtroom. When the noise finally died down, he delivered his sentence: 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. As Kentrell was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom erupted in a cacophony of emotions. Letitia collapsed in tears, while Derek sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the young man who had destroyed his life. The spectators buzzed with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow, the dramatic conclusion providing fodder for gossip for months to come. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the families, shoving microphones in their faces and shouting questions. Letitia, supported by friends from her church, could only shake her head, too overcome with grief to speak. Derek pushed through the crowd silently, his face set in grim determination as he ignored the barrage of questions. The aftermath of the trial left the once tight-knit community in tatters. The neighborhood that had once been a model of suburban bliss was now forever changed, its innocence shattered by the tragedy that had unfolded within its borders. Derek, unable to bear the memories and the pitying glances of his neighbors, sold the house within months of the trial's conclusion. The Versailles sign that appeared on the Parkers' lawn was like a final punctuation mark on the tragic story that had unfolded there. As removal vans carted away the remnants of his life with Nessa, neighbors watched from behind curtain windows, whispering amongst themselves about where he might be going and whether he would ever find peace. Letitia withdrew from community life, her once vibrant presence reduced to a ghost of its former self. She stopped attending church, stopped participating in neighborhood events. On the rare occasions when she was seen outside her home, she moved quickly, her eyes downcast, avoiding the gazes of those who had once been her friends and confidants. The scandal became a cautionary tale, whispered about at neighborhood barbecues and PTA meetings. Parents held their children a little closer, watched them a little more carefully, and behind closed doors, couples looked at each other with new eyes, wondering what secrets might be lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect lives. But even as life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, questions remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Were there warning signs that everyone missed? And what does it say about the nature of desire in the human heart that a moment of passion could lead to such devastating consequences? As we reflect on the tragic story of Vanessa Parker and Kol Wilson, we're left to ponder the fragility of the lives we build for ourselves. How well do we really know our neighbors, our friends, our loved ones? And what secrets might be hiding behind the perfectly manicured lawns and pristine facades of our own communities? The affair that turned deadly serves as a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that the line between passion and tragedy is often thinner than we'd like to believe. It's a story that continues to captivate and horrify, a testament to the enduring power of forbidden love and its potential for destruction. As we sign off, we urge you to be careful around your own neighborhood. Be cautious of the stories that are hiding behind closed doors. And most importantly, ask yourself, how well do you really know the people you call your neighbors? If you enjoyed this case, then make sure to watch the next one shown on screen.